The sea had a way of speaking that was older than memory and softer than thought. On some evenings its language was a hush, a breath drawn in and out across the long ribbon of shore. On others it spoke in rounded syllables, rolling and curling with the tide, a murmured conversation that only became louder if you stood close, if you put your hands into your pockets and leaned toward the wind. Tonight it was quiet. The old lighthouse listened. It stood on the shoulder of the cliff like a sleepless guardian, a pale column with a lantern room of iron and glass, its paint worn smooth by weather and years. From below, you might have thought it a pillar of moonlight itself, something poured from the sky and left to harden in the salt air. Inside, a staircase spiraled up like a long, slow thought. The steps knew the weight of a single pair of boots, and the boots knew each step by heart. Jonas, the keeper, lit the lamp before dusk truly ended. He moved with the unhurried patience of someone who had learned that light was not a thing to be forced, but invited, coaxed out into the dark like a shy bird from under a hedge. He checked the wick and the oil, polished the glass with careful circles, and afterwards he stood a moment with his hands braced against the brass railing, listening to gulls settling on the cliff ledges and to the faint, glassy chime of waves among the rocks. Evening slipped down the sky like a shawl. A first star opened its eye, then a second and a third, until the dome above was a basin of quiet brightness. The lens caught the lamp, and the lamp became a slow heartbeat turning, sending its pulse outward over the sleeping water. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a ship's bell answered. It sounded like a thought half-remembered in the middle of the night. Jonas descended to the keeper's room where the kettle sat waiting on the small iron stove and the logbook lay open, as if a diligent conversation had paused and would resume when he was ready. He wrote the date and the weather, clear, light wind from the west, tide high at midnight, and noted a pair of fishing boats beating toward the harbor before last light. He did not hurry his pen. The sea had taught him long ago that it was better to go slowly and see more. While the kettle came to the verge of song, he stepped outside. The night air was cool and clean, smelling of salt and heather and the faintest trace of wood smoke from cottages tucked into the fold of the land behind the cliff. Down the path, small lights in the village winked on and off as shutters were closed, lamps doused, doors latched. Dogs made their last rounds and then curled by hearths, paws twitching in dreams of grassy dunes and wind-ruffled rabbits. The world was settling, like a great bird tucking its head beneath a wing. He poured his tea and cradled the cup, warming his fingers. Steam rose in a quiet ghost, and when he lifted it, the scent was pure and clean, something grassy with a memory of summer fields in it. He sipped, and the warmth spread through him slowly, the way embers spread in the heart of a fire and hold a room in a gentle breakfast light even long after dawn. The lighthouse hummed. Not a sound really, but a presence. Stone holding the day's warmth, iron holding the day's work, glass holding the day's sky. Jonas felt it under his skin, a contentment that came from doing one thing well and letting that be enough. He set the cup down and climbed again. The lamp revolved, its light brushing the horizon, then the bay, then the far water. On a night like this, the beam ran over the surface as if stroking a calm animal, smoothing a mane, tracing a back. Where it touched, the sea answered with a low gleam, a sigh like silk. He remembered, as he always did at the first turn of the night, the keeper who taught him when he was young. A light is a promise, the man had said. It isn't loud, it doesn't shout, it simply keeps its word. Jonas had believed him, and he believed him still. When he rose again, he moved to the window that faced the headland. The coast ran out and curved in and then out again, like handwriting that had grown unhurried with age. A little further inland, low hills folded over one another in wool-soft shadows. Between those folds, in a pocket of land that caught the warmth of days and kept it at night, sheep slept under the open sky. Their breath made small clouds that drifted and dissolved. Somewhere a fox stepped softly along an old stone wall, paws almost silent on the moss. He climbed. The steps curved like a seashell's corridor. He passed the small window that showed a wedge of dark water and the great hinge of the sky. He came to the lantern room and paused with both hands on the brass rail, as he always did. The lamp revolved. Outside, the glass made small, secret reflections, ghost lights that slid and vanished and returned. He kept the rhythm of the lens in his chest. In the distance, a light moved low on the water. A little fishing boat coming in late, its single lantern like a bead on a dark thread. Jonas watched it for a time, not to supervise, not in worry. The night was clear and the currents known. But as one watches a friend walk home along a familiar street, the boat rose and fell in a slow, breathing way. When the lighthouse beam reached it, the lantern winked once, as if in greeting. The beam moved on. There was a small clock on a shelf near the logbook, a plain thing with a white face and black hands. But Jonas did not look at it. He noticed instead the way the floorboards gave back a little warmth to his stockinged feet, the way the stove clicked as it settled, the way the building itself seemed to listen to the world, the way the sea breathed and the wind hummed, and somewhere a tiny stone, dislodged from the cliff face, took the shortest of journeys down to the beach, a crisp little sound that ended before it could make a beginning. A foghorn far to the north sounded once, a long, low vowel that came and went like a tide inside the chest. The night leaned into itself. The lighthouse answered with light. Sometimes Jonas read, but mostly he listened. He listened to silence the way one listens to a familiar room with the lights off, noticing the shape of space, the way it holds you, the way it softens your edges. He sat at the small table and moved the pencil across the page, not writing now but drawing, idly, the curve of the coast, the lines of waves, the suggestion of the cliff path, the stitch of light between the tower and the harbor mouth. The pencil made a faint sound, almost like a moth's wing. He thought of morning only as a possibility. It would come, of course. It always did. He would trim the wick and let the lamp fade, and after that he would walk the shore while the world was still empty of footprints, and he would gather driftwood and perhaps a smooth stone for his pocket, and he would watch the line where sea meets sky write the day's first line. But that was later, and this was now, and now had more than enough to fill it. The night turned deeper and more generous. Clouds came thin and slow over the stars, like gauze drawn over a lamp, and the sea answered with a quieter shine. The beam of the lighthouse softened around the edges, not weaker but more forgiving, a hand wrapped in a glove. Jonas buttoned his coat to the throat and stepped outside again, letting the door fall softly to behind him. The world smelled of night water and clean rock. He stood at the rail that cinched the tower like a belt and leaned on his forearms, feeling the coolness of metal through the wool of his sleeves. The light swung over him and then away, and each time it went, the stars rushed in closer, and each time it returned, the stars yielded, unwilling but courteous. Below, waves unrolled themselves and learned again how to lie softly on the shore. They made a quiet rattle among small stones, the loveliest sort of whispering. The sand took the words and smoothed them. The beach, empty and patient, breathed. He thought of a story the old keeper had told him about a winter years ago when the ice had come down the coast. Not solid and brutal, but an army of small shards, like broken windows in the sea. The lighthouse then had been the only steady thing on miles of unruly water, and ships had kept their distance and fishermen had watched from shore and mended their nets until the ice passed and the world turned again toward warmth. The light had kept its promise, and that was what people remembered. Not the fear, not the cold, but the promise kept. A faint mist began to lift from the water, the sort that makes the air feel like a cool hand laid to the brow. It took the edges off the rocks and gave the light a halo. Sounds rounded, distances softened. Jonas welcomed it. In mist, the world drew closer to itself. He descended to the keeper's room and put the kettle back on. The stove ticked in a friendly way. He set a slice of bread near its small door to warm, and when he turned it, it smelled like morning in some distant inn where everything is clean and nothing is urgent. He spread butter on it, the butter softening and going glossy in tiny rivers. He ate slowly, one bite, then another, giving each its full due. In the logbook he added a note about the mist and the wind's slight change more toward the north. He drew a small icon he'd used for years, a curved line with 3 dots for stars, his private sign for a night that would leave the world rested. It was some time after that, no exact hour, the lighthouse did not insist on such things, that he took his blanket from the oak chest and laid it over the narrow cot by the wall. He would not sleep long or deep, Keepers learn to rest with one ear up, the way a fox sleeps, or a parent near a child. But he lay down and allowed the bed to take some of his weight and the room to hold the rest, and he let the sound of the sea arrange his breathing. The lamp turned. The knight leaned on the tower with an old affection. He woke not because something was wrong but because something was perfectly right. The beam moving, the fog a little thicker, the distant hinge sound of a buoy bobbing in its slow arithmetic. Up, down, counting the sleep of the bay. He rose, as he always did, without hurry. He folded the blanket with the same hands that had polished the glass and wound the mechanism, and he placed it back on the chest. He washed his face in cool water that held a memory of the well and the rain. The world was simple in the deep night and generous with its simplicities. He climbed once more, footsteps slow and respectful on the stair. He stood a long time with that cup. He let the warmth travel across his chest and down his arms and into his fingers, and when he set it down he felt, not stronger exactly, but more settled, like a boat that finds its proper line on the tide. The hours continued. The mist, friendly and soft, thickened and then thinned, rising as the sea breathed. The buoy counted. The beam moved. The tower held its own weather, a small, calm climate made of warm stone and honest work. Jonas stepped out again. The world was a study in grays, the sea a plate of pewter, the sky a dome of pearl, the cliff a charcoal line. The light from the lamp turned in that grayness like a soft brush laying down a path. Somewhere out there, beyond the gentle curve of the bay, a ship might be reading that path, trusting it. He thought of the captain's hands on the wheel, the quiet nod between crew members, the small look toward the horizon. It did not matter if no one saw the lighthouse itself. What mattered was that the light was there. He breathed in. He breathed out. He watched the tide turn. When he went inside once more, he wound the mechanism in a ritual that was also a kindness. He trimmed the wick, just the smallest careful touch, so the flame would keep its clean edge. He checked the vents. He polished one last smudge from the glass. Each small act had its own humble dignity, the way setting a table does, or smoothing a crumpled page, or drawing a curtain closed for the night. And then, gradually, the dark itself began to loosen. It did not vanish. It softened. The stars looked like chalk now on slate that had been wiped once with a wet cloth. The line of the sea drew itself more clearly, the horizon crisping like paper held near a fire. The village behind the headland took its first breath. Somebody opening a door to listen to the morning, a rooster issuing a comment that was less command than custom, a dog giving a single remark and then curling tighter. The baker's oven exhaled a sigh that passed along the lane like a quiet blessing. Jonas stood with the light a little longer. He let the lamp turn until the sea could be seen without it, until the path to the harbor mouth drew its own line, until the gray became not absence but presence, the first color of the day. Only then did he begin to tend the lamp toward rest. He lowered the flame by degrees, so slowly that the eye could not say when brightness became merely glow, or glow became memory. The lens turned a few more times with gentle purpose, then slowed, then came still. The world did not darken with it. The world brightened around it. The light had kept its promise, and now the day could keep its own. He wrote the final note in the log. Mist toward dawn, calm sea, safe passage. He closed the book with a hand that lingered a moment on the cover. He washed the lamp's glass one last time, not out of need but affection. He set everything in its place. The kettle, empty, waited for evening. Then he stepped outside. The cliff wore a shawl of pale light. The grass was beaded with dew, each droplet holding a perfect tiny dawn, as if the day had been broken into pearls and scattered on the ground for anyone to keep. The sea was a slow sheet of silver drawn, inch by inch, onto the beach. A single gull wrote its letter across the sky and then sat down on the far rock to read it back. The buoy, which had counted the sleep of the bay all night, quieted now, its voice no longer needed. Jonas walked down toward the overlook, boots leaving soft, dark commas in the path. The world smelled of salt and bread and fern. At the overlook he paused, as he always did, and placed his palm on the low stone wall. The wall was cool and damp with the dew of a night well kept. Beyond, the water breathed. He took the long way down to the beach, where the sand held the faint, neat signatures of birds and the looping scribbles of wind-tossed grass. He bent once to pick up a shell that fit neatly into the cup of his hand, its spiral exact and tender. He put it in his pocket and kept walking. A piece of driftwood lay at the high tide line, pale as bone, smoothed by travel. He lifted it, considered its shape, and set it aside for the pile by the lighthouse door. It would burn one evening and add its dry voice to the stove's low talk. He stood at the edge of the water and watched a small wave come in and fuss pleasantly over his boots and then retreat, reconsidering, as if it had only come to greet him. The day was beginning, but not loud about it. The horizon's cloud turned from iron to rose, and then to something lighter still, and the sky wore that color with an ease that made his chest ache. Not with sadness, but with the exact opposite. He turned back toward the path when the sun touched the edge of the cloud and broke into shimmering coins across the sea. He would sleep for a while, the good, unburdened sleep that comes after a promise kept. The village would begin its day. Nets slung over shoulders, loaves wrapped in paper, doors opening and closing, children slipping into the lanes with schoolbooks under arms and dreams behind eyes. And above it all, on the shoulder of the cliff, the lighthouse would stand. Resting now, but not idle, full of the quiet energy of work done well and ready to wake again when evening asked. He paused at the door and looked up once more at the lantern room. In daylight, it was only glass and iron and the faint gleam of brass. But Jonas saw in it the night's heart and the kindness it had extended over water and rock and sleeping roofs. He touched the door lightly, as one touches a friend's shoulder in passing. Inside, the room was already softer, the shadows filigreed by morning light. He took off his boots and set them side by side. He folded his coat over the back of the chair. He lay down on the cot and pulled the blanket over him, and the smell of wool and clean wind rose to meet him. His eyes closed as if they knew the way. The kettle, empty, waited its turn again. The lamp, trimmed and settled, dreamed its slow dream of brightness. Outside, the sea made the oldest music, and the cliffs answered in their stone register, and the sky held the day in open hands. The lighthouse did not need to say anything more. Its silence was as eloquent as its light. And as the morning grew more certain and the village laid its first bread on the counter, and the gulls held their parliament on the far rock and the buoy fell still at last, the keeper slept. The day moved onward. The path warmed. The heather held bees. The tide pulled its braided rope of foam away from the shore and then brought it back again, never impatient, always faithful. The world breathed and said nothing urgent. It needed no urgencies. And when evening came again, as it always does, and the first star opened once more above the rim of sea, the lighthouse would wake with a soft click and a clean flame, and the lens would begin its long, slow waltz across the dark. For now, though, the night's work was completed. The quiet had gone as deep as it needed. The promise had been kept. And in the keeper's room, where the blanket held the memory of long, restful hours, sleep wrapped itself around Jonas like the softest tide. And as the night deepened, the world grew quieter still, until only the sound of your own breathing remained.